Welcome to this Monstrous Flesh podcast mini-series, Monstrous Flesh Summer Camp. Bring your marshmallows and your sleeping bags as we huddle around the campfire to discuss some of the sweatiest and most bloodthirsty summer horrors. I'm Meg, one of your camp counsellors.
Hello, I'm Clelia, making sure you have fun and stay alive through the summer.
In this mini-series, we're diving into our summer of screams, and our first hike into the darkness beyond the campfire's edge takes us to Camp Crystal Lake with Friday the 13th.
Such a great film to start. I'm so excited.
So do you want to give us a synopsis in case anyone out there doesn't know what it's about?
I do. Let me refresh people's memory. Hello, campers. Welcome to Camp Crystal Lake, where the waters are as murky as the camp tragic past. The lake was the site of a tragic series of murder back in 1958 and has been closed ever since. But Crystal Lake's history of murder doesn't deter a group of young whippersnappers from attempting to reopen the site for business in the summer of 1980. Superstitious locals warn against it, but the fresh-faced young people, Jack, Alice, Bill, Marcy and Ned, pay little attention to the old-timers. Then they find themselves stalked by a brutal killer. And as they are slashed, shot, and stabbed, the counselors struggle to stay alive against a merciless opponent. They were warned, they are doomed, and on Friday the 13th, nothing will save them.
Oh!
This was the tagline from the original poster, by the way, the ending, which I absolutely loved. I mean, it's so sensationalist. It's brilliant.
It's like, it's as good as just keep repeating, it's only a movie, it's only a movie.
It's only a movie.
Well, that
was from The Last House on the Left.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Which is another film by Sean S. Cunningham, who is the director of Friday the 13th.
There you go, you see. Oh, wow, these little nuggets of information. Oh, fantastic.
Exactly. So do you have much experience with summer camps at all?
No. In a word, when I were a kid, we went on holiday once to Spain or somewhere, and I went to a kids club, and I was thinking about this actually because I think that was the first place that I ever really heard like urban legends, and I remember one of older, like teenage staff members were like, "Oh, you're too young, you can't hear this one," and I was like, "No, tell me, I want to hear." And it was the one about the woman who she thinks it's a dog under a bed, and it's like a man licking her hand under bed. And I remember
Amazing.
it, and I just repeated it for years to anyone who would listen. So that's my only real experience. But what about you, Clelia?
Well, actually, I have worked as a camp leader for a couple of years when I was 17, 18 years old back in France. And I can 100% vouch for the fact that, these kids are not safe, looked after by a bunch of teenagers, a bunch of rundy teenagers who have no idea what they're doing. So it was great fun at the time. Nothing as brutal as Friday the 13th happened, I'm glad to report. But yeah, I kind of thought about this rewatching the film actually, because I hadn't thought about that for years, and I was like, yeah, I can see how that could escalate quite quickly.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like putting kids in charge of kids, and I don't know why anybody thinks that's a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Putting the torch under the chin, and telling those awful urban legends. But actually, that's kind of got me hooked actually on these stories. So I'm really excited that we're talking about this film today. On that note, do you know that there's an actual phobia named after Friday the 13th?
Oh.
And it is called, and I'm going to try my best to pronounce it because it's impossible to, it's called paraskevidecatria.
Oh, well done.
I've been rehearsing it all this week, to be honest. I've been repeating it to myself incessantly to be able to pronounce it for the podcast. So as you can imagine, a very much a Western cultural construct, right?
Yes.
The idea of having a phobia of Friday the 13th. And so did a little bit of digging about this, and obviously it's all about the supposed unlucky nature of the number 13, coming from, Christianity and, the Middle Ages in Europe, basically. But that's quite fascinating. And I like the fact that it's called paraskevidacatreophobia, and it was devised by Dr. Donald Dosey, who told his patient that when you learn to pronounce it, you're cured.
Well, that's true, because all names of phobias are so unnecessarily complicated, aren't they? I can't remember the one that I had to say when we were talking about Bride of Chucky, and it was like the fear of puppets. No, sorry, fear of dolls. Fear of puppets is different.
Fear of dolls. And fear of clown dolls as well.
Oh my God,
yeah.
So yeah, they're all weirdly like Latin and too wordy. But yeah, it is. It's funny, isn't it? Because it is a very widespread phobia. Like the Friday the 13th thing. Like, people just don't leave their house, do they? And they're like, oh, I can't do it up today. It's Friday 13th.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know if you're superstitious at all. I'd like to think I'm not, I'm not, but I do have, I don't know, like little, rituals like everyone else, I suppose. Not necessarily around the number 13 or about Friday the 13th, but you do think about it, right? When Friday the 13th come along, you can't help thinking about it.
Oh, yeah. I always go, oh, shit, it's Friday the 13th. I mean, I do leave the house, and but I don't know. I am superstitious in some ways. Like, I salute magpies, because if you see one, and I don't like to, you're not supposed to cross on stairs apparently, so I don't do that, and I don't walk under ladders, but I feel like that's more just a self-preservation thing, because you could easily get a bucket dropped on your head. But yeah, not superstitious to the point that I think it would be labelled a phobia.
Yeah, not to that point. Yeah. Anyway, so let's talk about the film, shall we?
Yes.
So, I love to throw little production details about the films that we discuss every time, because generally I'm really interested in finding out about people's motivation for creating stories and making a film. And usually I would say it's always a joy to find out about these details. But with this film and with Sean Cunningham, I have to say it's left me a little bit flat. I don't know if you know about the about the. It's not grim or anything. It's just a little bit. It's just a little bit too money orientated. The reason to make that film. I think most people will know that is because he looked at the success that Carpenter and his producer had with Halloween, and he thought, well, there's a lot of money to be made here. So it just, I mean, even though, I think the, Friday the 13th, the film has a lot of good things to discuss about it. It's, We'll be getting to that later, obviously, but yeah, I like a good story about a good story. So I did find it a little bit disappointing. Saying this, there's kind of like a few interesting details in that when we mention it in the intro of this film, in this podcast, sorry, that he was a contemporary of Wes Craven, and in fact, he's actually the one who convinced Wes Craven to make his first foray in horror, because at the time, Sean's financial backers wanted to make a horror film, they wanted to produce a horror film, and so they went on to make The Last House on the Left together. Which was produced by Sean and of course written and directed by Wes Craven. And the idea behind the marketing, and you mentioned that in the intro, was to make it so sensational that it would generate a huge amount of attention. So the poster, as you mentioned, is famously read, "Breathe and tell yourself it's only a movie, it's only a movie, it's only a movie." And it worked, right? Because to this day we really remember that. So we kind of applied the same technique to Friday the 13th, in fact. He kind of decided that he wanted to make a horror film, as I said, after watching Halloween. And he said he had an idea for a film named Friday the 13th. So without a script or a team behind it, he rushed out to place an advertisement in Variety using the Friday the 13th title. He commissioned a New York advertising agency to develop his concept of Friday the 13th, which consisted of big block letters bursting through a pane of glass. And that was used as what the logo is seen in the film, right at the beginning of the scene, at the beginning of the film, sorry. And that's what famously kickstarted the funding of the film. I won't go more into details about this, but if people want to find out more about it, Netflix did a series called The Movies That Made Us, and they have a whole episode about Friday the 13th, and they kind of talk about this. But saying this about him having an idea about Friday the 13th, and then he ran with it, before having a script, I'm not sure how true the story is or how much it feeds into the myth. I heard that there was actually an original screenplay named A Long Night at Camp Blood. And in fact, I think Friday the 13th often come with the undertitle A Long Night at Camp Blood. And then Sean Cunningham changed the title to Friday the 13th. Riveting stuff, sorry.
No, it is. It's interesting because, and I'm getting in here early with opinion, if I've seen Friday the 13th before I watched it for this, it was when I was a teenager and I don't remember it. And I think that, how shall I say it? Lack of artistic depth comes across because it has not got the sort of richness of Halloween, for example, which leads with this really strong story and strong characters and the narrative is there. And I think even the Friday the 13th glass breaking, when I saw it, I was like, what's that got to do with a summer camp? It felt really weird. It felt like, I don't get it. Surely it should be like a campfire or, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a New York advertising bigwig, so I'm not saying that my perspective is the right one. But I think it has got a very disjointed feel to it that other slashers just don't have, that I think have maybe had more of a concept rather than we're going to make a lot of money, kids. Let's just throw some stuff together. But yeah, I mean, I think there are some really strong elements to it. Like I was thinking about music at the beginning when it's like ha 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 like that. Like, oh god, that's proper creepy.
It always gets me.
Yeah, but that's
it's
really
famously
good.
creepy, but
really good. But then, I mean, I may as well just be blunt at this point and say I thought it was too long. We're not enough killing. That was my perspective. It was too long, not enough killing, not enough character. I didn't care about any of them.
That's true.
There were no one you were really rooting for. It's not like there were. I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis weren't in it. Maybe if Jamie Lee Curtis had done it, maybe I would have been in. But
absolutely,
yeah. I mean, I did think it were. I don't know. What did you think?
It's kind of cobbled together. Well, I totally agree with you. And I was going to say, it's not a massive stretch of the mind. It's to imagine that the title came before the story.
Yeah.
Because, the story is very thin on the ground. And it's pretty obvious that they went in and figured out the formula used by other slashers of the time and riffed off that. There's so many tropes that, that the film is using with no with no reasons almost, and one thing that is definitely lacking is the character development. I'm not saying that slashers are usually big on character development. There's a lot of slashers from that era where you genuinely don't care about the characters, but one character that you tend to care a lot about is the final girl. And we definitely don't have that with this one.
I don't even know what her name is. I can't even remember.
Yeah, that's how. I mean, you remember the haircut more than more than her name. Really, it's so bad. It's so bad. And I think everybody remembers that Kevin Bacon in that film probably more than her. So it seems a little unfair, but there we are.
Yeah.
But there's some elements that I did find. I hadn't watched it for a few years, but actually rewatching it, it did strike me that the opening titles, the music, the soundtrack is very inspired by Psycho. And in retrospect, knowing the twist of the film, it's kind of a massive red herring as to who the killer ends up being, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was necessarily I'm sure it was a conscious decision, thinking how much they were really aiming for, how much return on investment they could make from this film. One of the main difference, I would say, from the other slashers of that era is the amount of gore in that film. So yes, whilst there aren't enough killing, and I agree with you, I think it is very different from Halloween, which is a much is a far superior film, obviously, and is very very conscious in his decision of not showing, any blood.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is like, how much gore can we get out there?
Yeah, well, to be fair, I always feel like I'm in that League of Gentlemen sketch, How Many Killings, when I'm like, there's not enough killings. But I did think that. I thought you either need more plot or more murder. One way or another, or a shorter runtime. I don't know. But there were like all these big swathes of time when I were like, oh, shut up. Like when she were going on about that dream, blood rain dream. Shut up, I don't care. Honestly, there's not more boring than someone else's dream. Like, it's not sexy, it's not scary, I don't care. Why are you telling me? Even Kevin Bacon, you could see him glazing. Just glazing of her. Just like, did not give a shit. And I think that's like the sort of thing about it, isn't it? That they're all really boring, so you don't really care. There's no... You
don't really care.
I mean, it did make me laugh at the beginning, like they're all actually singing around a campfire, and then they're going up and there's just, my note that I wrote were, it's got it all, killer's eye view, slow-mo and terrible heterosex. That one we know for that opening scene. And also I wrote, scratchy, dirty blanket, gross. When they just put that blanket down, I was like, ugh, it's like in a barn. It's like some sort of horse blanket. Oh, unsanitary. Unsanitary, terrible heterosex. But killer's eye view, which everybody likes.
But which we like, but also, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but throughout the film there are, point of view shots from the killer that clearly doesn't work. I mean, there are some point of view where there's one where Alice is running through the forest and she runs past the camera at some point, and you think, if this is the point of view of the killer, like this is impossible. You would have seen that person. That's just not. It just doesn't work.
I remember that because I said that. I went, how has she not seen him? Because she literally runs straight back. I'm like, how has she not seen him? Like, you would see that person standing there in woods out in Oxford if you just ran past him. So I did notice that as well. I feel like, now I know that like the motivation were purely like, let's get the biggest return on the investment. All of these things make sense. So like setting it at a camp, dirt cheap once you've rented campsite, dirt cheap, no one's messing your shots up, it's fine. And then obviously the lack of plot. But what really made me laugh is when they did that sort of flashback scene and then they did title card and it just said present, the present. I was like, what present? What does that mean?
What present?
Put a year on it.
Exactly. But also in terms of plot, it doesn't even work, and it doesn't even make sense in when you get to the end and you kind of understand who the killer is and what her motivation are. You think, but why? Then why did it happen? Why did the first killing occur a year after? Like, this is what I don't understand. It's like,
yeah. To be fair, what is her motivation? Because she's just killing innocent people. She's just killing innocent people. She didn't, the film would have made more sense if like all the campers from that summer had returned and she'd come to kill them because they had and also apart from what else, parental guilt about being a negligent parent. Like, why weren't you watching your son? Why didn't you teach him how to swim? I don't know. There's a lot going on there, but I do think that just killing people at the camp, it seems like a very harsh revenge.
Yeah, it does. But I think the same. But I was thinking, what can I say in, to play devil's advocate in that? I hate that term, devil's advocate. To advocate in, in favor of Mrs. Voorhees. And I was thinking about this on the bus on my way home today. And I was thinking, I'm getting a really weird, you're going to laugh at this, but hashtag not all camp counselors vibe from this film, right? Because to everyone who says that the film is plain silly, I'm not saying that I don't agree, but I would argue that this is a great film. So to reevaluate in the context of our post-Me Too era, right? So if we stick to the fact, we got a woman who loses her child through the fault of camp counselors, or could be her own fault as well, negligent. We're not, not just swinging one way or another, but for the sake of it, it's the fault of the camp counselors. They weren't watching, he drowned. And by the sound of it, no one was, that's the other thing. That's the other major plot hole. No one was apprehended or held accountable for, for this terrible It just died, and then a year later, there was another summer camp, and that's the other thing that's like, what? So as a result of this, she disassociates and does a reverse Norman Bates to exact revenge on the people responsible. Or are they the people responsible? I don't know. That's the thing. Like the two camp counselors in the first scene of the film, whether the camp counselors who let Jason drown, like we'll never know. I don't think they thought about this when they made the film, clearly. So instead of this bringing light to the injustice that she has suffered, people become obsessed with the law around these mysterious killings, right? That really talks to our true crime obsession in society. And as a result of this, the only detail that stick into the public consciousness are the murders, not the motives behind the murders, and not the original crime. So at the end of the day, there is no justice for Mrs. Voorhees, but the one she ditches out herself. So does this sound familiar at all? Is the film feeding us a hashtag not all camp counselors narrative the same way society feeds us a not all men narrative?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm thinking too hard about this. Maybe I am trying to defend this film a little too hard. I'll take it, but why not? We can rethink the film that way, I suppose.
No, I mean, I think that's a really good way to look at it, to be honest. And I have to say that Mrs. Voorhees is the only interesting character in the film. So I'm all team Voorhees. Like, I'm full in.
I am as well. And I am as well, especially for her.
Yeah. And
the way Jason speaks through her makes me laugh so much.
And kill her, mommy. Kill her, mommy. But I think she is absolutely like wonderfully sinister. Like when she first sees her and she's got that cable knit jumper on and you're just looking at her face and her eyes are mad. And I mean, she's brilliant. She proper leaned into it and I admire that, she was very good. But I know what you mean. It's like this motivation makes no sense. And I'm not saying that all slashers need to make sense because they don't. And that's what, we enjoy the sort of ludicrous element of the slasher. But like you said then, like... Yeah, you could understand it a bit more if she'd have been like, there were a trial and these people never faced any justice, and they were. But then again, like they were just horny teens. Were they negligent? Exactly. I guess. But why are your kids on a lake? It seems like it's, it seems
what
like
was he
it's
swimming on his own?
Why were poor Jason? The real victim here is poor Jason, who couldn't swim.
Exactly. Who's not even dead, by the way.
Not even
by
dead.
the sound of it at the end. That's another.
Is he dead?
A whole other thing,
is
right?
Is he not dead? Like, the thing is, and by the way, I mean, I don't think we even need to say spoilers, because if you don't know what happens in Friday the 13th, get a grip. This has been... But, yeah, I feel like it was just rife with all that sort of stuff. Like, yeah, and the only person I liked apart from Mrs. Voorhees were Ralph. Because
I love Ralph.
I aspire to be that eccentric. I just want to be screaming about death curses and then shambling off on a bike.
Me too. I want to say this place is good. It's just great. He's wonderful. I love him on his little bike. I'm like, come on,
like
come
bobbling
on, Ralph.
off on his bike. Like, come on, you're all gonna die, doomed.
I know you're doomed. Exactly.
Fantastic.
I just love the scene where he's they open the kitchen pantry and he's there, and the whole time I was thinking, how long was Ralph in the pantry? Like, what was he doing there?
What happened to Ralph? How did Ralph get here? And also, the thing that got me it reminded me of that horrible shower block. It reminded me of going camping as a teenager, which is one of my only experiences because I hate it. I don't want... Anyway, that's another podcast entirely. But when they were all just like wandering out and she were like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and brush my teeth. And I think this is a massive camp here. Are you not... Even if there weren't a mad Mrs. Voorhees on the loose, are there not bears? Wolves? No. Wild animals of some description. And they're just wandering about like, oh yeah, it's all fine. Just sleeping in them big empty... No one's got any fear. That's what I'm saying. No one's got a healthy amount of fear in this film.
Yeah, like the scene where, I mean, she does that when earlier in the film they found a fucking snake wandering through the cabin, and again they have a good old laugh getting rid of the snake. I'd be like, bye guys, I'm out of here. I'm packing up my shit and I'm going back to the city. No.
Also,
Exactly.
they didn't really kill a snake, did they? Because that looked quite realistic. I hope they didn't kill a snake.
I'm not sure.
I hope not.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because I were watching it and I were like, oh, that looks too real for me. I hope you didn't really kill a poor snake. But I think And also, I mean, we do have to, I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that this film is quite problematic in many ways. Like, so just a bit. Not only do we have that lass who never makes it, who's going to beat Cook, apparently, but she can't string a sentence together, and yet she's going to beat Chef for this camp. She gets a lift off that creepy perv. Who gets it? But then I know it was 70s or whatever, and this is why serial killers were so successful in the 70s, because everybody were just giving lifts and hitchhiking. But I was like, why is she in this car with this man? And then they're all coming in that car. Kevin Bacon and what's her name? Other one, boring one with Blood Dream, and other guy. And I was, is she wanking Kevin Bacon in that car?
I know. Oh my God, I'm so glad you mentioned this, because there's an allusion to this in the in the dialogue, and I had to rewatch that scene, and I was like, am I seeing this right? What the fuck is going on?
I'm watching it, and I'm like, is she jerking Kevin Bacon off while his friend's driving him? That's weird. Like, that's so weird. I don't understand. And then but then all the rest of the film, she's like quite sort of buttoned up to a point, isn't she? She's not like loosey-goosey running about, you know. But I'm like, so you're willing to like...
Only in cars.
Yeah, only in cars. You're willing to jerk your boyfriend off in front of his friend, but then all the rest of the time, you're quite prim. Like, I don't get your vibe. It's just really strange.
That's summer camp vibe for you. Only in cars.
Yeah, what happens at summer camp stays at summer camp. But I did...
Yeah, thank God.
One of the things I did like, though, was the very strong fashion game. So that guy everyone's wearing Daisy Dukes and neckerchiefs. And, you know, shirtless in the majority. Shirtless Daisy Dukes, neckerchiefs.
I know that is such a strong look. I mean, we'll be talking about this quite a lot, I suppose, in this miniseries.
Yes.
It's like the look of there's a particular look in the 80s and in summer camp. I mean, I'm not sure if this film is at the level of Sleepaway Camp, honestly, but it's definitely strong. It's strong.
But also as well, and I feel we have to touch on the guy who weren't getting jerked off, whose name escapes me. The one I can't remember. The one who thinks he's like the practical joker guy. This is me all over. I'm terrible.
Oh, Bill. Is it Bill?
I think it might be Bill.
No, it's Ned. Sorry, it's Ned. No, it's Ned.
So I thought when they were all, you know, first setting up, when she's setting archery thing up, and I thought, what's up with him? Has he got a leaf on his head? And then I was like, oh no, he's being racist. Sorry, he's just being absolutely racist.
Yeah.
And I was like, what am I watching? Why is this guy doing this? Like running around being I don't know. I was just like, why? What is the plot point to this? Ned's an arsehole. We already know he's an arsehole.
Absolutely not. Exactly, yeah. Ned's not the Joker, he's an arsehole.
Ned is not the comic relief. Ned is a racist arsehole. I mean, I were pretty disappointed, I've got to be honest, because I were really hoping that all the kills were going to be camp themed, and I was disappointed that not all of them were. So I would have liked to have seen, like, you know, Ed bashed in with a wonky ashtray that someone had made,
definitely
suffocated on marshmallows, you know, bow and arrow.
The bow and arrow happens. So there's one that ends up being, and I don't even understand the physics of this, by the way, because there's one guy who ends up being nailed to the back of a door with arrows. Who clearly has been shot in him, but he's off the ground. I don't understand how that works. Was he mid-jump and he got an arrow that nailed him to the door? How did that work? I'm not sure.
Well, or another plot point, another hole, which is the idea that 5'2" Mrs. Voorhees could have lifted him up and pinned him with arrows to the door. Like the idea that this tiny little woman could have lifted him to do it. I'm not saying she couldn't chop somebody up with a machete, you know, an axe, whatever, fine. But to actually lift a man, to lift him and pin him with arrows, I think, you know, that's a different thing.
Yeah. Well, maybe. I mean, let's talk. In terms of plot holes. I mean, the main one, I suppose, is the fact that she's exacting revenge for the death of Jason, and Jason is actually quite chill. He's chilling in the lake, and that scene at the end is just. I mean, looking at the production notes, I mean, they added. It was actually, Tom Savini did the practical effects and the makeup for the film, and it was his idea. He said he was like, oh, what about this film is missing something. You should bring Jason at the end, and I guess the filmmaker was like, yeah, cool. That's like a great idea.
It doesn't unravel everything that we've done to this point at all. It's fine. It's fine. And also, not only that he's still alive, but also apparently hasn't aged. He's still a child. It's just
he's still
not
a child,
aged at all.
Yeah. That water is keeping him well hydrated and young, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, that's totally true. Because so he's not dead. So she's just gone on a murder spree for no reason.
He's not dead. Reason. He doesn't want to come home.
Yeah, he's not dead. He's got boundaries. He's gone, you know what, Mum? No. I've had enough.
But I did wonder, in terms of the killing, maybe at night Jason come out of the lake and helps his mum do the killings. I don't know. I mean, that could be another theory. I don't know. But I mean, the thing is, obviously there wouldn't have been the rest of the. I mean, the franchise is completely ridiculous. I mean, and that's the other thing. The franchise is renowned for Jason and the hooky mask. And obviously, as we know, there is. No mention of, well, there's hardly any mention of Jason in the original film, but definitely not of the hockey mask. So, I mean, talk about I don't know, talk about bullshit, I suppose.
I mean, I think this is a clear case of, starting, going feet first, regardless of how prepared you are, and then, writing the narrative as you go.
Yeah, as you go along.
It's like Jason really liked hockey. How are we doing hockey at a summer camp at Woods? How do we know that about him? How do we learn that? Why, why do we... Machete, all right, fine. They've set Machete up because his mum were using a machete, whatever. But, yeah. I think... Yeah. And I also think that, I mean, the sex scenes are an abomination in this film. There is
really
nothing...
are. Oh my God, this is when you really want the killing to happen as soon as possible. In fact, it's like, please, make it stop.
There is nothing erotic at all about any of the sex scenes in this. And the thing that I had said, how naked is Kevin Bacon in this? Because we all know Kevin Bacon loves to get naked. He's naked in everything, I think, more or less. So I was like, how naked? And then, so my note was bacon butts, which made me laugh. Like bacon bits, but instead we've got the butts. So he loves getting his bum out, so we know that. But also the fact that he got his bum out and then he corked it. Bum out, dead. That's what happened. They got the money shot, dead. Arrow. Didn't he get an arrow through him from under bed, which were quite good. That was quite a good one. That was
quite good, yeah.
I liked
probably
that
my
one.
favourite death of them.
And my favourite death were her getting that axe to her head because the effects were brilliant. The effects are very good, I think, the practical effects. But yeah, I think the kills themselves are really good and the practical effects are very good. It's just everything around it.
Yeah, everything around that makes absolutely no sense. And it's really funny for a film with literally no plot. It takes such a long time to, set itself up and then, then for the first kill to happen. It's really, I just find it really hilarious that scene with Marcy, I think who clearly gets picked up by Mrs. Voorhees, and is telling her life story as they drive along at 100 miles per hour, by the way. I was like, oh my God, you would not be casually conversing with someone who's driving that fast. You'd be like, I'm in the car with a fucking maniac. Please let me out.
Oh my God. And I think as well when she jumps out of a car and lands on her neck, and I thought, poor lass, she's not giving up from this. And then she's like, and I was watching it with my partner and he's going, run. And I was like, she's fell on her neck. She's pulled her neck. She can't run. This poor lass, she's trying to get herself together. And then she's taking her through woods. And I'm like, what a stupid decision. You're running into the woods. How big are these woods? Like, you're just going to get... I've seen enough wood-based horror to know you keep as close to the road as possible because you're just getting deeper and deeper into these woods. And, I mean, I think that I think we have to think about it, I suppose, at the time, I bet that were really, really exciting. That sort of killer's eye view, and you didn't really know what killer were, and now it's so played out. Because I said to my partner about, have you seen it? Do you know what killer is? I don't want to spoil it for you. And he went, no, but I've seen Scream. And obviously in Scream, that's, the Mrs. Voorhees. So it's like, it's such a foundational part of like the slasher lore, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But it's so boring.
It is so boring. But I tell you what, it is so boring because, not so much because it's been overdone so much. I think in this one it's because her character is not introduced until the very end.
Yeah.
Well, there's like, if she was in the background the whole time and there was suspicion of who's doing the killing, I think that would have been really interesting.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really, it's like in Scream, it's like it's a Scooby-Doo episode, right? You're kind of like, who is it? Who is it? Well, in that case, it's kind of like, when you find out, then all of a sudden you have time to think, how? What?
Yeah, I think if there'd have been more of Mrs. Voorhees, like if she'd have come in earlier, and you could have, because I know she has quite a lot of exposition in quite a short space of time when she's doing the kill them all, mummy, kill them all.
Yeah.
But like as a character, and I don't feel like I can get too deep into the depths of this film because it's apparent that there aren't any. But I do think that as an idea about like this sort of homicidal guilt and grief is really interesting. It could have been a really interesting character that that could have been fleshed out and developed, and that would have made it really interesting because she is brilliant. But I think as well, like the fact that as soon as she's in like, because when she came on, I thought, oh well, this has got to be end because now we know what killer is, and then we're like, no, there's still like half an hour of this film left. What are they going to do? And then she just chases her when she's got that shotgun and she throws it at her. Why is she throwing it at her?
I know, she's probably the stupidest final girl in all of them, right? It's just like, I think at least with Sally in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you can understand because she's so traumatized at that point that, nothing she does kind of makes sense. But with Alice, you're like, oh, fucking hell, she's so helpless,
Yeah, and I think that's it. That's what's so hard because she's so, it's like laughably helpless. Like you said, Sally in Texas Chainsaw, she's trying. Laurie in Halloween, she's going, she's trying to save her own life. She's not just. Yeah. And I think when she gets in car, keys are in it, lights are on, and she's like, oh, there's a dead body, I can't possibly drive away. I'm like, you'll be the next dead body then. You will be next.
Exactly.
Just drive along, kick the body out of the car as you drive it if you have to.
Exactly. In no uncertain term, Alice, it's sink or swim in this scenario. If you hadn't noticed already, this is very
all your
much
friends
the
are dead.
moral of the story.
Literally, all your friends are dead. You're the only one left. And she's like, oh, no, oh, not a dead body. Oh.
It's not. I'd rather sleep in the middle of the lake on my little robot.
It did make me laugh, though, when she's like, when she throws that shotgun and then she's throwing twine at her. But what I did notice is she does hit her in slats. She does kick Mrs. Voorhees in the slats. And she goes down like a sack of taters. And I'm like, oh! And you don't get enough of that. So I do the things I appreciate, Mrs. Voorhees, Ralph, Mrs. Voorhees being kicked in the slats. They're the three redeeming features that I think are in this film.
No, I definitely agree, and I think, like you said, there would have been there was something very interesting to explore about mother's guilt and grief, but obviously, as we said, when the story is the afterthought. I think considering actually that the plot was the afterthought, then there are still some interesting trope and imagery that came out of that film and that endures. So we can't entirely write it off. But yeah, it's the kind of film that you revisit once in a while and thinking, yeah, I did. So that, I think, if we think about it now, if A24 made Friday the 13th,
It would be all Mrs. Voorhees. It would.
Yes,
it would
exactly.
It would be
origin
like
story.
The first half would be Mrs. Voorhees' grief process, and then we'd see her travelling to the summer camp, and then we'd see the murders. Yeah. We would have like all that perspective, and I think, maybe we just.
She'd be played by Toni Collette, obviously.
And she'd be played by Toni Collette, and but I would watch that all day long. Mm-hmm. But I think perhaps it does. It is a little bit of like the changing of tastes in what people like, because I suppose it was still quite early in the slasher cycle. Really, weren't it? So people weren't as saturated on them, so they weren't looking for more to differentiate.
Exactly, subtext.
Yeah, whereas now...
It was real escapism.
Yeah, and whereas now we've seen so many slashers that you're just like, well, what's it got? What is it, Not, again, as I've said, I don't think all slashers need to be like, Oscar-winning screenplays. I like just a cheap and nasty slasher, but it's got to have a plot or more murders.
Yeah, exactly. At least give us a plot or more murder. Exactly. Make it one way or the other.
But yeah.
So saying this, do you have any interesting folklore for us?
I do.
Excellent.
And you might have thought, dear listeners, that I wouldn't be able to find folklore to Friday the 13th. Well, never let it be said that I don't do my best.
Never fear, never fear.
So today we're going to learn about haunted bodies of water. Oh. So we know that all bodies of water have a primal lure, which, that draws us in to their murky depths. But some rivers and lakes around the world appear to have ghostly inhabitants that, much like Jason, wait just beneath the surface to drag you to your death. So, we've got the Devil's Pool in Australia, which is said to be haunted by the ghost of Ulana. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. An Aboriginal woman who drowned herself there after being separated from her true love. And she's now said to haunt the area, luring young men to their deaths. And apparently 16 young men have died there over the past 50 years. So Alana is doing God's work, drowning men.
Thank you, modern mermaid.
But what's interesting is, so the next one I've got is called the Bride's Pool in Hong Kong. And this is said to be haunted by a bride who drowned when she were being carried in like a sedan chair to a wedding ceremony. And the chair dropped and she fell into the rapids. And so a body was never found. And even today, people report seeing a woman in this traditional red wedding dress brushing her hair on the riverbank. So what I noticed is that a lot of these stories are very much tied to like a broken-hearted woman haunting these waters, which I think is interesting. I can't elaborate on that any further, but I just thought it were interesting.
No, it is. Yeah. Why is that? Why is it always I was going to say, why is it always beautiful women, but why is it women in general that do the haunting? And like, because we're better at it. That's why.
Well, in Blackwater River in Florida, there is a woman with long black hair that emerges from the water, or even a puddle. She's been found to come out of a puddle to grab you and drag you into the water. And apparently, you'll know when she's coming for you when you smell the scent of rotting flesh.
Oh, I love that.
Yes. So I mean, well, I just thought this long black hair, it's very like, the ring, isn't it? It's very it's very evocative, you can imagine it. But I couldn't find any information about who that woman is. That's just someone who they've seen, has been seen. And staying in the US, let me paint a picture for you of Manchac, I think it is, Manchac Swamp in Louisiana. So it's about 30 minutes outside of New Orleans, and as we know, New Orleans is rife with the old folklore. New
Orleans is the place.
And it's a place full of swamp ooze, pea green water, alligators, and ghostly cypress trees. And so the main threats to those who enter are sunstroke, alligators, and broken logs that lurk under the water, waiting to snag passing boats. However, another threat is said to lurk in the murky waters of Mancha Swamp. So the ghost of voodoo priestess Julia Brown is said to haunt the waters there. And she was known for her charms and curse work in the area, helping residents of the nearby town with her powers. And she was also known for her haunting music, and she used to sit on a porch and sing. And one of her songs had the lyric, "One day I'm going to die, and I'm going to take all of you with me," which is exactly what happened. Oh,
I love this.
And also a motto I can get behind. But on the day of her funeral in 1915, a stage 4 hurricane swept through, causing hundreds of drowning deaths. And apparently, Brown can still be heard to this day cackling at the edge of the swamp.
Oh.
So we like that folklore, but I did do a bit more of a dive into this because, as you know, with other voodoo queens like Marie Laveau, quite often history is unkind to these women. And I think we've seen a lot of women who've been sort of maligned by history when we've talked about, you know, the folklore around in his other podcasts. And the truth instead seems to suggest that actually she was a healer and a midwife in a small town that had no doctor and limited access to outside resources. And so an article I found had talked to a modern day voodoo practitioner who had commented that, you know, voodoo is about healing rather than harming. And so she were actually remembered in the area as a really beloved local healer rather than a vengeful swamp witch. But, you know, we like a vengeful swamp witch as well. So, you know.
We do, but it sounds like a familiar story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's always, yeah.
The woman who lives in the swamp and she's got these gifts that, you know, are sort of envied and people sort of...
Gorgeous.
Yeah, people wish that they had these gifts and then they're sort of painted in a negative light by history. But I think... It's just interesting to me, this idea about haunting and water, because, you know, like, I mean, we're going to talk about the Bermuda Triangle, but I think so much has been said, and that's a bit of a big body of water as well. That's pretty big.
Yeah, just...
But you know, the I suppose the sort of... I think water is quite fascinating in terms of folklore and myth, because obviously we've done like mermaids with the Lure episode in season 1. If you've not listened, go back and listen. But
there might even be the screening coming of it quite soon.
There might be a screening coming up. But yeah, I think there's something really interesting, and I suppose it's because there's quite a lot of, I suppose, death around water, isn't there? You know, that people drown or people disappear. Like, you know, the bride's pool in Hong Kong, she fell in and they never found a body because of these rapids. It's quite a... Jason living in the middle of that lake, apparently, for years. No one ever saw him. Sorry, I keep coming back to that ending. I did scream as well. I did scream, even though I knew it would come.
Oh yeah,
I scream.
It's a good jump scare, but good jump scare, just completely irrelevant.
But yeah, that's I mean, as I say, there is other folklore around like the Bermuda Triangle, but I just thought I'd come with a few examples from across the globe. I mean, I'm petrified of deep water. I don't know about you. I would not have been in that lake.
Oh. I can't, absolutely. I mean, the idea of open water swimming is just the one of the most frightening things to me. I just find it really interesting to, like, what, you know, that you gave us examples from around the world. And like I said, you know, all these folklore revolves around women. Again, it's really interesting to think, but that it doesn't necessarily translate into, well, you know, in Friday the 13th, I'm not saying that obviously the film wasn't, is not a great example of folklore or anything for you know, for what it matters. But, yeah, but I think that maybe actually if there had been a folklore element, that would have probably worked better. But I find it really interesting that across the globe is that these stories relate to women and to them being perceived as witches as well. So, you know, again, it kind of like it really plays into that cycle of persecution of women as healers, now seen as witches.
Absolutely, because I think when you think about, you know, realistically, many more men have probably died at sea than women through being fishermen, and, you know, historically men like in fishing villages and things like that. But you never, or I didn't come across any places that were like haunted by men. They were haunted by these, you know, witchy sort of women or broken-hearted women, you know, that romantic ghost of the broken-hearted woman. And I do think it's something I might look a bit more into, actually, because I feel like, why aren't there more men who are haunted? You know, you never hear about really ghosts like fishermen. It's always ghosts of like women whose husbands died at sea and they're waiting for them to come home. You know, it's all that sort of thing. It's very interesting. But I suppose even in Friday the 13th, like Jason's the sort of catalyst, but you know, he's not even that. Like with Mrs. Voorhees and sort of talking to him, like that even could have been explored a bit more, couldn't it? You know, it's just like she turns up and then she's like, "Oh, my son's dead," and he's telling me to kill you, and it's like and then obviously he goes on to be the sort of hockey mask wearing slasher, but we never, you know, who is Jason? Who is Jason? Apart from a hockey fan who can't swim.
It's always who is Jason and not how is Jason.
Absolutely. Well, with that in mind,
that is fascinating.
What recommendations do we have for our listeners looking for more like Friday the 13th?
For more, I actually didn't really look into any recommendation. Although one came to mind was we were talking about grief, not necessarily mother's grief, but I don't know why, but like the film The Night House came to mind. I don't know if you've seen that with Rebecca Hall. If not, it is available on Shudder, I believe. But I think that's a very interesting exploration of grief, not necessarily maternal grief, but like how obviously, and it takes place on a lake basically, so that maybe that's why I thought about it. But I think that's and you know what, since plot is the last thing that we worry about in this episode, why not? But this one is great, and I think it's a great example of how grief can be explored to a much better end in a film. So I'm totally making this up, sorry.
No.
So what about you?
Well, as you were talking about lakes, I did think, I had not got it on my list, but I did think about Lake Placid, which I think is an absolutely fantastic lake-based creature feature. And I love a creature feature. We might even have to have like a creature feature miniseries at one point. I think that'd be good. But yeah, obviously Friday the 13th sequels, there's loads. They did a remake, which I think maybe I saw the remake because I seem to remember the sex scene between the counsellors being much more explicit, and I were waiting for it and it didn't happen, and then I thought, oh, maybe I saw a remake, maybe I've not even seen original. We've got Madman Mars, which we might even cover on this at some point. I love that. I think that's brilliant. And one came out that I reviewed actually in, last year, and it's called Final Summer. And that's very, very, very much inspired by Friday the 13th. Even more than a homage, I think. But yeah, that's a similar thing, like, you know, teens in a summer camp, stalked by some sort of shadowy figure. Not my favourite.
I mean, it's a great setup, right? There is so much to explore in it. And obviously this is, mainly why we are doing this miniseries, because it is a breeding ground for horror, I feel.
Well, it really is.
To some degrees of...
Yeah, but like there's no kids in this. So it's not even like you get the...
I know, exactly.
Yeah. Like I think in Madman Mars...
Don't even get the full experience.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Madman Mars has got the kids are there, I think. It's been ages since I've seen it, but yeah, like it's such a, there's so much there, like it's because I think kids at summer camp, they're away from home, it's like an isolated location.
I just thought that actually we should have mentioned the Addams Family Values would have been a really obvious one, talking about kids at summer camps.
Oh my god, honestly, I love the Addams Family.
Me too.
My heart belongs to the Addams Family, and I remember seeing that as a kid, and just honestly, I am Wednesday in that scenario. Like jump in that water, absolutely not. No, what? No, thank you. No, is she going to drown? Not my fault.
Not my fault, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent recommendation. But yeah, it is such a, and so I suppose that is why we wanted to do like a Summer of Screams summer camp horror, because there are a lot of them as well.
Exactly. And we're so excited to keep exploring them.
Yeah. But yeah.
It's a subgenre to itself.
Yes. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed our first sort of evening round the campfire with Friday the 13th, and that people return for the rest of our summer of screams.
Yes, very excited. I think next week we'll have to bring our torches so we can actually, especially when you do when you do your bit about folklore. I'm really, I think I was really into it, and I was like, oh, need a bit of ambience there.
Yeah. Yes, next time I'll bring a torch and we'll do the proper.
Please do.
Thanks for listening to Monstrous Flesh Summer Camp. Please join us next time as we continue our Summer of Screams. You can find out more about us via our website, monstrousflesh.co.uk, where you can find out more about our research for each episode, buy our wonderful merch, and see our upcoming events. We'd love to hear from you, either via our email or social media channels. Also, please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts and help us spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. Until next time, creep it weird, everyone!